Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Fire and Ice podcast. My name is Chris Crawford. Today is Monday, October 9th. Thanks so much for joining us. I am with my good buddy who I have not podcast with in a very long time. Excited to see my good buddy, George Bissell. George, how are you doing today?
What's going on, Chris? It's great to be back. I'm happy to be with you.
Me too.
A long time in the making, so it's good to talk with you again. And we got some real exciting playoff baseball to talk about. I'm thrilled to be here.
We do have some exciting baseball to talk about. And finally, George, we have something that is not 2-0 lead in a baseball series because of Minnesota getting the big 6-2 win. And we'll start with that one, George. I think this was a pretty massive, it's probably an understatement, but going down 0-2 to Houston probably would have been a death sentence for this team. Now I think Minnesota, you have to make them, I think, the favorites for the remainder of the series, don't you? Especially with the pitching matchups in these next two games at home.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at Minnesota kind of beating Houston with the blueprint that Houston perfected over the last half decade or so.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. And obviously to see Carlos Correa doing it against his team. I mean, the storylines are endless here, but I start with Pablo Lopez. He was just phenomenal in this matchup on Sunday. He threw first pitch strikes to 22 of 27 batters that he faced. So he was just excellent. And he's a guy I know we've liked for a long time, former Mariners guy as well. So It's nice to see him succeeding. He was always one of these guys we thought could be a frontline pitcher, and he really kind of took that next step this year. So to see Minnesota doing it, I have a lot of faith in them going forward. And you look at some of the pitching matchups rest of the series. Christian Javier has pitched great on the road, but he's a guy who's been up and down. He's been real hot and cold, inconsistent throughout this season. So, and Sonny Gray was one of the best pitchers in the American League, no matter how you want to slice the data. He was great this year. So, and that matchup's going to be at home in Game 3. So, yeah, I think you do have to give the Twins a slight edge, and they might be better in the bullpen right now, especially with Kendall Graveman missing this series due to injury. So, there's a lot of really interesting small details that you can hone in on, but overall, like you said, I think the Twins have the edge right now.
Yeah, and look, I will admit, as a biased Seattle Mariner fan, it doesn't break my heart. I also actually grew up a Twins fan. The 1991 World Series was kind of my introduction to baseball, really, as an 8-year-old watching that series. And I just assumed that every World Series was going to be that good from that point on. I don't think I've seen one as good since, to be honest with you, and seen some pretty good ones, but that one was a pretty special one. Like you said, Christian Javier has been better on the road, but so much mixed stuff going on with him. And speaking of mixed stuff, Baltimore, Texas. Look, I think a lot of people thought Texas limped into this postseason because they kind of did. Like, they did not look too great, but they've looked awfully good over these first two games to get an 11-8 win on Sunday, mostly due to the offense, to be completely honest, but they are able to piece together enough stuff. I'll ask you this, George, too. Was it a mistake to start Grayson Rodriguez in Game 2?
I don't think so, because he was so good in the second half. He looked like a completely different pitcher. And I think that was something he talked about. Was his first major league start actually was against the Rangers, and he got lit up and it wasn't great. And he was demoted to the minors a couple weeks later. But when he came back, he was really good and he was consistent and he showed the progress I think the Orioles were looking for him to make. So I don't necessarily think it was a mistake to start him, but this is what you get sometimes when you're relying on young pitchers. I mean, there's going to be ups and downs, and you see this throughout the years. I mean, Clayton Kershaw gave up, 6 runs and didn't get out of the first inning. So, and that's a guy who's going to the Hall of Fame. He'll be inducted the minute he's eligible on ballots. So, you never really know. And like you said, that's the nature of the postseason, and that ties into how well the Rangers offense is playing right now. Where you look at, they had those 6 all-stars, and then it felt like every one of them got hurt, maybe, except for Marcus Semien. So the second half, things were kind of a disaster for the Rangers. They had those big swings of winning streaks, losing streaks, and then finally everybody's kind of back on the field together. And Evan Carter, man, his approach, and I know you're a prospect, you followed him for years, but his approach is so impressive. And he doesn't try to do too much. I think that's what really strikes me when I watch him day to day. I've been super blown away by him. So this is a lineup that's hot right now, and I think it's overcoming some of the deficiencies they might have in the bullpen.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and look, this bullpen is not very good. Although Josh Boras, has done a decent job in these first couple of games, and It's going to be the case where I think they're going to have to outscore teams, but that's okay because that offense is really good. It's one of the deepest lineups I think in baseball. I would probably only put Atlanta above them in terms of like pure depth. By the way, I think the decision to move Mitch Garver to the 3rd spot, that's where you just got to keep him. Like they've experimented. They've had guys like Robbie Grossman and some other guys there. I think Garver makes an awful lot of sense. I also like that Carter's been moving up in the lineup as well, hitting a walk yesterday, hitting 500, 706, 1.10 slugging percentage. That'll work. And like you said, I've been so impressed with his approach. I talked about this with Drew. I thought he was more of a high floor guy to start the year than high ceiling. Yeah, that was wrong. There is plenty of ceiling to go with this guy. I obviously like the ceiling in the long term as a top 10 overall prospect. I thought he was more of a high floor guy because of the approach. But yeah, really impressed with what I've seen from him so far in these first 2 games. George, who wins these next 2 games since we won't be talking until next Monday?
I think the Rangers, I worry about the pitching.
Yeah.
They're going to throw Evaldi game 3, but he's been kind of nails in the postseason going back years. Remember those Red Sox series, 2018? He coming out of the bullpen in games, and like the guy's a postseason player. So I think the issue for the Orioles is you have a lot of young guys who haven't been in this spot before, and I think losing Felix Bautista as the anchor of that bullpen, I think that's going to end up being a bigger loss than we had all imagined because it's just like a mental thing where you have that guy at the end who's going to get the job done. Now you're asking everybody else to adjust and play a different role than they have all season. And Yennier Cano's been outstanding all year, but like it's different when you're the guy, when you're the closer as opposed to the setup guy. So
right.
I think that's having a bigger impact. And now you got to go on the road to Texas against this lineup that, like you said, is just phenomenal at this moment. It seems like they've kind of unlocked the solution with their lineup mix. So I think you got to go with the Rangers here. And I'd love to see the Orioles advance. I think they're a fascinating story, but
Sure.
I think there's too many question marks right now to have enough, time to solve things against the Rangers.
And how about Minnesota, Houston? Who I'll ask you this: give me your predictions for how these series end because they'll definitely both be done before Monday.
Yeah, I think the Astros Twins one has a chance to go the distance, but I do give the Twins the edge.
Mm-hmm.
You'd like to see what like Verlander has in the game like 5, like that's gonna be fascinating. You might go 4, but yeah, I think the Twins, you got to give them the edge. I think their bullpen might be better than Houston's right now, so that's where if it's gonna be a longer series, I'd lean towards Minnesota with their edge in the pitching department.
Yeah, I'm going to say both series go 4, and I'm going to go with the upsets in both. I'm going to go Texas in 4, and I'm going to go Minnesota in 4 and set up an ALCS that absolutely no one would have predicted before the season, and I guarantee no one was predicting before, after even the regular season came to an end. But yeah, I think that we're going to get that Minnesota-Texas series that Rob Manfred has been clamoring for his entire life.
Yeah, like if I had told you Jacob deGrom basically like wasn't gonna pitch this year for the Rangers, and then told you we're gonna potentially make the World Series, you'd say I was nuts. Like that doesn't make sense. But
no,
I thought like moves like Jordan Montgomery, Nathan Eovaldi, they weren't the flashiest moves they could have made, but it really helped shore up once they had injuries and guys who were ineffective. Those guys really made the difference, I think, for them this year.
100%, and I'm good for both teams because Minnesota, I think, is getting a little bit of a karmic retribution for trying really hard at last year's deadline and getting that reward. And Texas is getting their reward for trying an awful lot and cutting their rebuild down quite a bit, signing guys like Simeon and Seager before necessarily they're ready for contention. That's why you do something like this, folks. Yes, it does lead to 1 year of not so great baseball, but it can lead to cut that runtime down quite a bit. All right, we're going to give our stacks and pitchers to use, but before that, make sure you guys are checking out the Contrarian Edge Optimizer. It's an awesome tool. It gives you a chance to create a bunch of different lineups for a bunch of different sports too. It's great for football. It's going to be great for NBA as well. Can't recommend it enough. If you're watching on YouTube, right below that ugly mug of mine, you can just scan that code right there, or you can go to fantasysportslogic.com, or you can go to sportstopia.io and check that out. And you should definitely be checking out sportstopia.io. We've got great DFS plays. We've got lineup projections. We have a whole bunch of NFL stuff that has rankings. We are super biased, but we cannot recommend that enough either. All right, so we've got two games today, George. We have the Atlanta Braves taking on the Philadelphia Phillies, and we have the Dodgers taking on the Diamondbacks. By the way, I really hate this spread out stuff. I get why you have to do it a little bit because you want to get more games in. But if you look at like Atlanta and you look at the Dodgers, they looked like they were rusty in those games. They really did. That's two of the better offenses in baseball with pretty good starting pitchers going for them. And they just looked ill prepared and rusty. And I'm guaranteeing you teams managed by Brian Snitker and Dave Roberts aren't prepared to play. I think that there's something about this. And then after that, you have another day off before you can play your next game. You got to fix the scheduling here, George, I think.
Yeah, so it's the double-edged sword, right? Because on the other hand, you say, well, you'd love to have all that extra time off, the lineup rotation, make sure everybody's healthy, get extra rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think there is something to this, and especially when you look at like the Dodgers, they've been a streaky lineup all year.
Yeah,
they've had stretches where they've been on fire, and then they've gone ice cold for it feels like a week at a time. So, yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, especially when you have like veteran guys who are just you become accustomed to playing every day. So I think that is a factor, and that's part of the reason I'm kind of leaning into things with my picks today. I'm going to go like heavy on Phillies.
Yeah.
I just like the way they've been playing, and they look like they're ready to go. And I don't know the answer to the question. I'd agree with you. I'd like to see the series, the spacing a little less on the time between games.
Right.
But on the other hand, I do think those teams, if you gave them the choice, they probably would take the rest.
Right.
Honestly, that's what they would do. So I don't know how you balance things to not have it where teams have that extended layoff before they have to play again.
Yeah, there's no perfect answers. Like, don't get me wrong. And it worked out just fine for the Astros, who won 105 or so games last year and used that rest and set it up. But my biggest issue is the rest and then that day off after. I'm going to be really curious to see how Atlanta and Los Angeles look. And since you mentioned those Phillies, why don't you talk about why, spoiler alert, you were using them as your stack today?
Yeah, so Max Fried's coming off a bit of a blister issue. He says he's 100%. He says he's ready to go, but you never truly know with those things. No. There's the chance it limits his effectiveness. It maybe limits what he can throw, and that's a dangerous spot to be in the postseason. So I worry about that a little bit. As excellent as Max Fried is, I think that's a variable to watch, especially early on. It also leads to the chance that he doesn't go deep into the start.
Sure.
Because the issue. If that blister opens back up, Atlanta can't take any chances with his long-term health. So
right.
I think that's something to watch, and I think that's going to lead to Philadelphia stacking their lineup with a lot of right-handers. Obviously, you have your usual suspects, Trey Turner, Alec Boehm, Nick Castellanos, JT Realmuto, but even guys like Edmundo Sosa, I think are like cheap under the value, kind of lefty mashing guys, where I think maybe he gets an at-bat or two before they go to Bryson Stott at second base. So Sosa's got that extra versatility too, where they could keep his bat in the lineup and move him around as the game progresses if needed. So I'm going heavy on the Phillies. I like Zach Wheeler too. He's been pitching outstanding of late. So I just think despite this matchup being in Atlanta, I like Philadelphia tonight. I think they've got a real edge in this game if some of the issues with Fried continue.
Yeah, I mean, I picked Philadelphia to go to the World Series before the postseason. I just think they're playing the best of everybody right now, with all due respect to the Braves and the Dodgers and the Orioles. I just think they have something kind of special about them. They're kind of built for October, even with a not great third starter, although Ranger Suarez was pretty darn good in that start against Atlanta in the last one. And the thing is, too, you look at that Philadelphia bullpen, it's so much improved over the iterations that we have seen in the past too. It's an odd thing to say. I like the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen. It's like one of those sentences that in movies, it would be the thing that sets off the bomb or whatever. But I do actually like that Philadelphia bullpen on top of that great lineup. I'm going to go with the Dodgers against the Diamondbacks. All due respect to Zach Gallen, number one thing is, I keep picking against the Diamondbacks, and I have to be right at some point, George. I just have to. Like, legally, I have to finally get something right. I just thought they looked like not good. Words I'm not allowed to say on this podcast. Like watching him literally back into the postseason with this final spot going 84-78. They've looked fantastic. I'm going to give them a ton of credit. Obviously, they were helped on Saturday by Clayton Kershaw just having no command of anything that he was throwing. But they're a good lineup that took advantage of it. I just think the Dodgers are a really good offensive team that looked a little rusty in that first game. And Zach Gallen, while he's a quality option, the Dodgers have hit him pretty well this year and in the past as well. ERA over 9 this year, only 2 starts, but that's still something to keep an eye on. I don't think that Gallen has that elite stuff necessarily that suggests you can guarantee 7 innings of 2-run baseball or anything like that. And it's very hard to hold a lineup as good as the Dodgers 2 games in a row. So I think the Dodgers are going to score some runs tonight. And spoiler alert, I might be going with one of their pitchers as well.
Yeah, I was going to say Bobby Miller, man. If there were a guy who you were like, hey, just go out there, throw hard, leave it all out on the table. Don't worry about honestly, I bet they're going to say to him something like, well, you can't do worse than Kirsch did. So go out there and just let it fly. Like, I think he's the type of guy who's succeeded in these spots. Remember when he came up, we were like, whoa, he's getting a pretty prominent role here. And we've seen the Dodgers do this before. Like when Buehler came up, he was immediately thrust into the spotlight. So it's not uncommon. And I think he's got the stuff and the mentality to pitch really well in this spot. So, and like you said, it's only a matter of time. You can't hold Los Angeles and Atlanta for that matter too. These lineups are going to score runs eventually.
Sure.
So yeah, I think the Dodgers tonight, if they're going to save their season, it's got to be tonight.
Absolutely. I will say that though, if any team was to go down 0-2 on the road in a series, I think it would probably be the Dodgers that I'd have the most confidence in. You could argue Atlanta, I guess, a little bit just because they have had some postseason success, but I'm really worried about their starting pitching behind Strider and Fried. And who the heck knows, like you said, what we're going to get from Fried tonight. I wouldn't be shocked by 6 innings of 1-run baseball. I wouldn't be shocked by 3 2/3 innings of 1-run baseball. I wouldn't be shocked by 3 2/3 innings of a heck of a lot more than 1-run baseball. You just don't know.
The Braves have thrown a lot of stuff at the wall in the late stages of the year. It felt like at the trade deadline, and obviously losing Charlie Morton was huge because he probably would have taken the ball game 3 or maybe earlier, and you could have gotten Fried some extra rest. So you don't have him. Kyle Wright's going to have shoulder surgery. So another depth guy that they probably would have had, and now they don't. Like Bryce Elder's a nice story, and he's pitched well, but you're relying on him in game 3, and then after that, it's Alan Winans. Like, it's not ideal what they have afterwards. So Darius Vines, you're really scraping the bottom of the pitching barrel, and those guys are fine if they're like your 5th starter in the regular season. That's perfect. But playoff series, so. Like you said, I like the way the momentum's going for Philadelphia, and that bullpen, they took that, strategy of we're going to bet on a bunch of high variance arms, and they've kind of hit on all of them, basically, like Gregory Soto, Craig Kimbrell, Orion Kerkering, their prospect, like every sort of lever they pulled has kind of worked this year from a pitching standpoint. Even like Chris Sanchez has taken a huge step forward.
We have to re-examine that trade a little bit. The Curtis Mead for Christopher Sanchez trade looked like an absolute disaster at this point last year. Doesn't look so bad for Philadelphia anymore. I think if you offered them the trade in reverse, they might say, hey, come on back. But it does look like a lot more fair deal. Pitching-wise, like George said, I am going with Bobby Miller. He's been fantastic in the second half of this season. And again, I'm betting on Arizona. Can't go undefeated. This is not that Colorado Rocky team that was just beat up after sneaking into the postseason, beat up the NL, and then it ended up making it to the World Series. I think, George, you're well aware of what happened in that World Series after they got there. But this is not that kind of team, in my humble estimation. All due respect to Corbin Carroll and Christian Walker, I'm going to go with Bobby Miller. And it sounds like you're going to go with Zach Wheeler for your starter tonight.
Yeah, Wheeler's been pitching well. And if you look at what the Braves do well, they hit for a lot of power. They're going to try to hit home runs. Wheeler hasn't given up a home run in his last 3 starts. He hasn't given one up since September 18th. So that's a pretty good run. I mean, I know 2 of those starts on the regular season, but Miami's lineup's a high variance lineup. They try to hit for power. So I like the way Wheeler pitches in the postseason. I think he's aggressive. He has the right type of mentality. And, we saw in the last series, when he took the ball game one and then Nola was on extra rest, like that strategy works. So I think Philadelphia kind of has everything lined up the way they want. And if anyone was built to go up against like a historic lineup on the road in a playoff start, it's a guy like Zach Wheeler. So he'd be my pick tonight. I like Miller, obviously, but there's a lot more variance, I think, with that pick. I think you're shooting for the upside with Miller. So I think I'd go more steady with Wheeler, where maybe he only gives you 6 innings, but I think there's a lot less risk there.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. You're talking about the upside play with Miller for sure, and the floor with Wheeler. There's plenty of ceiling with Wheeler to go as well. There's a reason this guy has been in the Cy Young conversation. It seems like since 2013, but obviously it hasn't been that quite long. But it does seem like it's been every year. This guy is like in the top 5, top 6 of that conversation. All right. Who wins these series, George? I'll give my picks first. I'll go with Dodgers in 5. I still think that the Dodgers having home field advantage, and I think they'll be able to steal one game in Arizona. The Dodgers take that one. And I'm going to go Phillies in 4. I just think Philadelphia is a better team, and it wouldn't shock me, especially if the Phillies win tonight, if it's Phillies in 3, because Aaron Nola against whatever the heck they put out there in game 3, probably Bryce Elder. Huge advantage Philadelphia, especially with the game being in Philadelphia. I'll say 4 just to be safe, but I would not be shocked if this is a sweep. And this just goes to show you that the regular season, it's great. And the postseason is, I hate the term crapshoot, George, but it's kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah, we've talked about like the contextual factors that are really having an impact, and it's on the pitching side, like teams like Baltimore and Atlanta. That's where they're having issues. The lineups, you can get hot or cold, but I think like fundamentally, when you have injuries and guys changing roles that late in the season, I think it really can have an impact on you. So I lean Phillies. I wouldn't, like you said, I wouldn't be shocked if it were a sweep. You want to give Atlanta some respect because this is like a historic lineup that they can tear the cover off the ball unexpectedly for a couple of games, and all of a sudden you're looking at a game 5. Right. So yeah, I think 4 is probably the right number for Philadelphia. Like maybe they have a hiccup here and take the extra game, but I think when you look at the totality of the roster and the roles, and this is basically the same team from last year, kind of like the mix of offensive players, with the exception of Trey Turner. Like this is a team that's been here before in this spot, so I really like them in that matchup. It's just tough because I thought the Dodgers were probably going to make it out of the National League and go to the World Series. So I think I got to stick with my gut and not let, one really disastrous start from a Hall of Fame pitcher cloud my thoughts on the rest of the series. It has to start with Bobby Miller tonight. I think if he doesn't pitch well, they're in real trouble because I don't know where they're going after this. If you look at the rest of the series, Ryan Pepio, like who is it? Like there's Walker Buehler's not coming out of that tunnel. Like I don't know where the pitching's coming from. Emmett Sheehan, like who do they have right now at this point? So
that's the thing for me too. Like Lance Lynn, looked really good after the trade deadline and then has looked really bad again. And now some of that might be just regression to the mean that Lance Lynn is not a 1.5 ERA guy, just like he's not a 7 ERA guy either. There's somewhere in between. I think if you can get 6 innings of 3-run baseball from this guy, you just have to be pleased as punch. This is going to be really interesting. Like none of these teams outside of really, to me, Philadelphia has looked all that great. I keep going back to the backing in by Arizona. Like they just didn't look like a good baseball team. And I'm trying not to let 3 games of sample size get in my head too much. One thing I wanted to ask you about, George, I meant to bring it up earlier. There was a lot of controversy about the catcher's interference. Was that the right call?
I mean, I don't even know. I've seen it like 100 times.
Yeah.
I can't tell. This is a very antiquated notion, but I think they should just get rid of replay almost altogether. It used to be if it were a bad call, you lived with it and you moved on. We didn't need to. It used to be frustrating when the guy would slide into the base and like, well, did he pop up for a half second? And did his hand leave the bag for like a millisecond? And I'm like, that's not the spirit of the rule. That's not what we're trying to do here. So I think they should have it in like a break glass in case of emergency. Where
there you go.
If it's just have an official, like the league can afford to do this. Like have an official there who says, hey guys, like obvious call. Like, we missed the play at first base. Like, he was
Yeah.
safe. It's obvious. We're going to reverse the call. And if everyone can agree on it, on viewing it 1 or 2 times on a replay,
Mhm.
then that's the way they should go. But I don't like when there's, this much controversy around a call. I think it's just easier to kind of say, hey, we might get something wrong occasionally, but it's probably for the best, and it makes the game move quicker. I think it kind of grinds things to a halt. I've become very anti-replay, and I sound like an old man here yelling
No.
clouds, like the meme. But I think they should kind of scale back on replay, if anything. That's where I lean these days.
So I was for a long time very much not in your corner, but I'm becoming more and more in your corner just because the pace of play with these calls and the minute crap that they have to like overturn because of fingernails coming off a base and stuff like that. Look, and I'm also a little bit hypocritical here. I am very much pro robot strike zone. I need that in my life as soon as possible. But that's different. That is taking something objective and not making it subjective. There's so much in baseball, like subjectivity can be kind of a good thing. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, and here's the thing too. Everybody throwing their beers and stuff like that. Number one, knock it off. You're adults. Number two, that's not the reason Atlanta lost. It's not even close to the reason Atlanta lost. That made a 2-0 game a 3-0 game. It didn't really change anything. So thank goodness for that. George, real quick before we close things up, is there anybody outside of the lineup stacks we talked about that you're really interested in using tonight?
I think some of the lefties, you mentioned the Dodgers lineup maybe waking up. If you're looking
Mhm.
for like an under the radar play, guy like David Peralta, Jason Hayward, I think they're going to be
Nice.
in there tonight,
Mhm.
because they do have that like platoon split where they go like Enrique Hernandez is in there usually. Sometimes it was Ahmed Rosario for a while. So I think the Dodgers kind of rotate that mix, and I think you could see a guy like Peralta or Hayward up in a big spot. Maybe they come through with a big hit. So that's sort of the under the radar kind of guys I'd be looking at tonight for the Dodgers, because you have your usual suspects that are in there. JD Martinez is Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts.
Sure.
But if you're trying to go a little under the radar, like that's where I kind of lean.
Yeah, that makes sense. One quick guy for me. Anytime Michael Harris goes 0 for 4, I like Michael Harris the next day. I do think that he may not score a bunch of runs tonight, but I do think he has a chance at a very nice day. Big Michael Harris fan. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to the Fantasy Fire and Ice podcast. You can follow George on whatever they call that website now, at George Bissell. You can follow me at Crawford_MILB. Make sure you're checking out all of our socials, following along. We've got daily shows coming for the NBA, the NFL, and of course, MLB will be here Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.